Welcome once again to the Trinidad and Tobago Film Festival, celebrating 15 years. And right about now, our special guest is Michèle Stephenson, who directed the documentary Stateless. Michèle, it's great to have you here with us live. And I just had to tell you that Stateless won the special jury prize for Canadian features at Hot Docs. This was like a few months ago, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right.
And it's also been nominated for Best Feature Documentary at the TNT Film Festival. How do you feel about that, being nominated and with all these accolades and so on?
I mean, that feels wonderful, I have to say. I mean, I'm very moved, and it's always a real pleasure and honor to be able to, you know, not just have the stories recognized, but also the people who, you know, who are at the forefront, certainly of this fight against statelessness in the Dominican Republic, that their stories are being able to be seen by a broader audience. So I'm humbled and very honored to be considered. It's especially when you think about, you know, our Caribbean brothers and sisters being able to be part of the community, and that the community be able to enjoy and see and share these stories.
Could you explain to the uninitiated? Could you tell us what exactly is Stateless all about?
Okay, the film really is about Dominicans of Haitian descent who lost their citizenship from one day to the next in September of 2013, of which the Caribbean, certainly the English Caribbean, certainly fought against what happened. The Dominican Republic Supreme Court came down with a decision where they ripped people's birth certificates. They annulled birth certificates from one day to the next, specifically targeting people whose ancestry was Haitian. It was a racist, elitist measure really made to delegitimize and further marginalize the Dominican population that is of Haitian descent there. And so over 200,000 people from one day to the next became invisible, which means they no longer had any access to work, could not go to school, and could be picked up at any moment and sent to a country they don't even know. Many Dominicans of Haitian descent have never been to Haiti, you know, and in some cases, they actually made the law retroactive to 1929, when the border was officially made under the American occupation. So, so this is the culmination really of the results of really anti-Black behavior, state-sanctioned behavior by the Dominican government and its elites against Haitian migrants and Dominicans of Haitian descent. But the story is still very, very personal. We follow the journey of a young activist by the name of Rosa Iris, who is of Haitian descent herself, yes. But has her papers because her mother is Dominican. And we follow what the lived experience is of our brothers and sisters there.
Can you give us an update as to what the situation is like right now in the Dominican Republic in 2020? Has it gotten better? Has it improved? Has it gotten worse?
Oh, right now it is just as precarious. There has been little to any change. And if anything, as with most parts of the globe, the pandemic, COVID-19, has just further exacerbated and exposed, you know, the marginalization and the rifts that the society already had in its underbelly. One of our actual advisors on the film was actually arrested recently. Because of after the uprisings that happened here with the death, the lynching of George Floyd by the police in Minneapolis, there was a global uprising, right, against white supremacy, including in the Dominican Republic. And so she was arrested about a month ago, posting a memorial to recognize the police violence against Black and brown bodies. The Dominican nationalist fascists came down and pushed the police to arrest her. Her name is Ana Belique. She runs an organization called Reconocido. and they arrested a group of them. And so they were later released, but it's all the terrorism, you know, that happens on a day-to-day basis. And to think that even the threat of putting a memorial to commemorate, you know, the life of a man from another country is seen as a threat really explains what the stakes are. And yes, no, there's been little to any change.
We're talking with Michèle Stephenson, director of Stateless, one of the feature documentaries that you can see right now. You can check it out right now at the Trinidad and Tobago Film Festival. You know, it's ironic. It's ironic when one considers, I mean, you're talking about the Dominican Republic that shares the island of Hispaniola with Haiti. And in terms of African ancestry, it's quite high in the DR. Even those who would claim to be, who would pass for, quote unquote, parenthetically speaking, white, there's some African ancestry in practically all of them. So why the animosity? Was the animosity always there? There's a line in your documentary that goes something like this, but we refuse to accept that African part of us. Why? Why do you think that is?
Whoa, well, that is partly the history of the Americas too, when you think about it. I think the Dominican, yes?
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right, because you can see certain commonalities. I mean, we have our Caribbean, Trinidadian author, V.S. Naipaul. He once said that Trinidadians have keen eyes for different shades of blackness. And I couldn't help but notice that as well. There's a parallel in the Dominican Republic, you know, while watching it. It was, and I have to say as well that it's an affecting. It's more than just a documentary, but it's a human story as well.
Yes, it's totally. I mean, we try to strengthen our storytelling power because we feel that's how we can reach people. So it's more than just facts. In fact, facts kind of are there. They're important, but there is a narrative, you know. Well, to answer your question, I mean, it's historic, right? I think across the Americas, we suffer from a racial caste system that takes on kind of different iterations from as far north as Canada as far south in Argentina. And I like to say, if we look at it historically, it all started on the island of Hispaniola. This is where Columbus landed. The first Europeans arrived there. The first Africans arrived there. The first genocide against indigenous peoples happened on that island. And the first system of racial caste system and colorism emerged, state sanction emerged from the colonial extractive, you know, endeavors on that island, and then it spread to its different manifestations of how we see, you know, the racial caste system look. If you take the example of one of the characters in our film, Gladys, she is a fascist, and she is deeply anti-Black. And yet she's Black herself. At least many people would categorize her as Black in terms of how they see her. Right. But she, so in that way, you see that island in some ways has the two extremes of what white supremacy has done. On the one hand, you have this disconnect where people don't even really see themselves in their mirrors because of this desire to be white, to better the race, right? That is deeply ingrained in Dominican society and to a certain extent also in Haitian society. And then on the other side of the island, you have a country that is really a maroon society. It is Haiti is a country that has always been at the thorn on the butt of white supremacy because of the revolutionary past. And today they are also, the country is part of the African Union. There's always been kind of a turn to Africa in the face. So on that island, you have all the permutations of what colonialism, white supremacy, and capitalism have done to the Americas, all concentrated in there.
Just a reminder to our online viewers, if you've got any sort of questions that you would like to ask Michèle, you can do so right now. We're inviting people to come online. If you're watching, you have a question, go right ahead, ask, and she'll try to answer it as best as she can. You know, have the authorities in the DR, have they seen this? What was their reaction? Have they seen it? They haven't seen it yet. So it's like it bleeds. It irritates them for them to watch something like this, I would imagine.
I would imagine they have not yet seen it. I'm working now with the activists on the ground to plan for a release, but we're taking like months at a time to kind of plan so that it's kind of anchored with support from the movement that's happening down there. But I do want to say, I mean, there are a couple of things I want to clarify around Dominican society and my experience there for the 5 years that I spent there. It is a very complicated and nuanced sort of space where there is an elite structure and this right-wing presence that is pushing an agenda, but they are a minority, but they have power, right? But on the other side, there are also young people trying to change the narrative, you know, trying to create and build sort of a community across the border. And the history throughout. No, go ahead. It's a historical thing. You know, there's been even, you know, across the border, there is a society and there is a community of collaboration that exists that is kind of below the radar of the state sanctioned, you know, habits and oppression, right? That happens in spite of that. So one thing that we do show in the film also, that because I feel like it is important to understand our history to not repeat it. And in some ways, these acts, these state-sanctioned acts of rendering people invisible is a form of genocide that has a history. In 1937, the dictator Trujillo ordered the murder and massacre of Dominicans of Haitian descent and dark-skinned people along the border. And I sort of pay homage to the people who died there through the story of one young woman, so that it's a way of understanding that in some ways history is circular. And if we can't acknowledge that past, it's very hard for us to move forward.
So institutionalized, we all know that institutionalized racism is real and that it does exist, not only in the US, but several European countries to a certain degree. And it's also a lot closer to home than we think because of what's going on in the Dominican Republic. Do you want that to be the major takeaway for people viewing this documentary?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. This understanding that white supremacy is global. That there are links between, you know, in this two things. One, that there are links between the fascist sort of right-wing movement in the Dominican Republic that has links that are global. But the same way, the resistance is also global. As you saw with the uprisings, they became a global statement against the oppression, the racist oppressions that people face. So yes, what you just said is I would love for it to be one of the takeaways for us to understand that it can be in my backyard. Somebody like Gladys, somebody with these types of attitudes could be my neighbor and could be in my family actually as well. So how do I interact with that? There is a certain level of banality in her habits and how she acts and what she says that we need to be kind of aware of and understand and resist.
And the thing about it is, she is not your foaming at the mouth kind of racist, but a rather convivial, sort of congenial even person that you would want to talk to, and you would never believe. I guess that's what makes it so insidious, the level of racism.
Yes, exactly. I mean, that was one of the intention. We were intentional in that casting process that, well, on the one hand, you know, I had to be with someone that I could spend time with, right? Not someone who was so virulent that it would be even difficult to spend time with, but also to really bring home the banality of this hatred and how it exists and how it is insidious and how it permeates our existence and many of our relationships. So, yeah.
Yes. So now you've suggested that the change begins on an individual level, working from the ground up. You said this in a recent interview. And is that possible in a country that seems adamant on maintaining the status quo?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, was it Angela Davis who said that the struggle is the journey, is the mission? I think that I don't like to use the word hope. What I like to kind of encase, even in the work that I do, you know, the films that I try to make, the stories that I try to tell, or how I challenge myself creatively is all about, it's partially about healing, right? About healing and understanding how have I been internally impacted by the structures around me. and how can storytelling help the healing process, but also create conversation across within our communities and the healing that's needed. That being said, I don't think we have a choice but to resist and to keep moving, attempting to move the dial forward, right? To push against oppressive and sometimes, what seem to be astronomical sort of pressures against us, because it's the only, for me, it's the only way to practice being a human being, right? And learning from that. So it's about, on the one hand, the small successes, but also understanding, what legacy do I leave? What legacy do I leave my children? What legacy do I leave the community that I'm a part of? How do I engage in a practice where, at least at the individual level, there's some form of transformation that happens?
And yet the protagonist, Rosa Iris, who has, I'm sorry, I kind of lost you there for a second. Forgive me. I'm sorry, I didn't catch what you were saying at the tail end. No, I was just about to tell you that the protagonist, Rosa Iris, she has fought hard against this, and I think she has a personal stake because of her cousin, Juan Teofilo, and things got so bad that her life was threatened, and the life of her son, because she would get these unsavory messages on Facebook and so on. And she had no other choice but to leave the Dominican Republic, and she's now in the United States. She sought asylum and she got it. Isn't that rather daunting, though? I mean, for someone who is born and bred in the DR, and this is your country, this is the language that you speak, and this is where you feel at home, and now you're forced to leave because you want to make your home better, not just for yourself, but for your dark-skinned brothers and sisters. And yet, can any sort of pressure be put on the authorities to reverse that decision, or is it again? Do we have to suggest that perhaps individual change from the ground up, that might be the only recourse?
Well, I think it's a combination, right? It's a combination. We each kind of find our lane to work in, and exile has been extremely difficult for Rosa Iris, obviously, but at the same time, certain doors have opened for her to become an even larger spokesperson for the movement. She recently got a scholarship at American University to do an LLM in humanitarian law that she's going to take with her and be able to be more of a spokesperson. Even with this film, the objective, before the pandemic, but I think even as we continue, was for her to sort of travel with the film and be able to be that spokesperson outside. There's work to be done outside as well as inside. And I think that some people feel the calling to work from the ground up, others feel a calling to work on the inside of the system, and others find different ways. So I wouldn't say it's an either or situation. I think it's a combination of all of the above. And as I say, many of the people that I've been in touch with, who've been our advisors from the movement in the Dominican Republic, continue the fight today on a daily basis, whether it's on Facebook Live or through demonstrations or through legislative work with human rights lawyers. They're pushing the agenda. They're pushing the agenda. And sometimes it's 2 steps back and 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. But the pressure is constant.
Well, there's one thing that we do know about history. It is anything but linear. Do you think that what's unfolding right now in the Dominican Republic has it been given more prominence? I mean, the whole world is caught up in the grip of the COVID-19 pandemic. There are so many other issues to consider, but everyone's talking about COVID-19. Do you think that more prominence should be given to what is going on right now in the DR? If not, why not?
What do you mean more prominence in terms of
in terms of coverage? I guess what I'm getting at is in terms of more news coverage. More, I think there are a lot of us in the Caribbean who are not as aware as we should be of what is going on. Some of us have only like a passing interest, if you will, of what is occurring in the Dominican Republic.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, you know, there is a propaganda machine that's been going on for many years now by the Dominican state to really sell the country as this resort vacation space on the cheap end, where people can, you know, can have access to beaches for inexpensive. So it's a big job to push against that propaganda. And obviously, yes, I think all of our Caribbean brothers and sisters should be paying attention to this. And I think to a certain extent, you know, part of the racial caste system that is more extreme in the Dominican Republic, we see inklings of it across our communities as well. But yes, I mean, we should obviously pay more attention. But I think also is that because this is at its nature looking at anti-Black oppression and how white supremacy is practiced, it's not going to be picked up in the same way, right? It's just not going to be picked up in the same way by mainstream media. Mainstream media sort of has its agenda in terms of what it sees as important. And there was a little moment when the decision happened of, you know, an invasion of news sources kind of looking at what the situation was, but the government knew how to respond in a way that deflected. And so now the news is gone and the propaganda machine continues, but the people continue, you know, to suffer.
Now we're running out, I'm sorry, we're running out of time.
Okay.
But just one thing, that's okay, that's okay, because we're having a really interesting conversation. I want to ask you something, Michèle. Do you have any closing comments, anything that you'd like to say with respect to Stateless? What would you tell people who haven't seen it before? What would you advise them to? What would you tell them?
Well, for people who haven't seen it before, I would definitely encourage them to watch and to understand that when you sit down and watch the film, it's really a storytelling journey that is very deeply anchored in the characters that you will feel completely compelled and inspired by. And I hope that, you know, you take away, for those who have seen it, a greater understanding of not just how kind of white supremacy works around our communities, but also a greater kind of respect and belief in the people who are at the forefront of trying to create change.
May I say something? I watched Stateless earlier today, and Juan Teofilo, to see him undergo this ordeal, and to see how much of an effect it had, and particularly as it concerned his kids, that got to me. It really got to me, and I'm hoping that people who do watch it, I mean, they will feel the same thing that I felt, that degree of humanity and warmth. And I hope that we can look at it from that perspective, from that human perspective, because that is what it's all about. We're talking about human beings here.
Absolutely, and in some ways, Juan Teofilo, what I've understanding, he took one route that's different from Rosaides in terms of his reaction to the oppression that he faced. I see him as a modern day Maroon, in a sense of escaping, you know, looking at Haiti and the mountains of Haiti as a place of liberation for him. For him to become a full human being. And in some ways that flips the script on how many of us perceive the country, that in some ways it is still a place for liberation for some.
Indeed. Well, I think we'll have to leave it there, at least for the moment. Okay. So I know that your film is going to earn a lot more accolades as the weeks and months go by. So it's been a pleasure talking with you, Michèle. Michèle Stephenson, director of Stateless, Trinidad and Tobago Film Festival, celebrating 15 years already. Wow.
Yes, this is my second time at Trinidad.
Your second time, really?
I was there, yes.
That is so cool.
I had a beautiful, beautiful time, one of my all-time favorite festivals.
All right, well that is really cool. I like that. Thank you so much. Okay, great. So that's it, and we'll be back to do it all over again tomorrow, hopefully, keeping your fingers crossed. Yeah, well, tomorrow's the final day. So we still have some time to watch some films and be edified, if you will. Michèle, thank you very much for being here with us.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.